Hello, David. Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about outputting. It's something we've got a lot of questions about from a lot of people, and even myself. There's a lot of little details that I'd like to ask David about. So without further ado, let's get into it. So David, in ALG, when and how do you start speaking? How does that work?
So let's assume that everyone's familiar with the idea that we listen before we start speaking.
Right.
So the length of time that takes is going to be a bit different for everybody. But it's as if there's a string attached from 0 to a point where you get to where you naturally start speaking.
Okay.
Right? And this is very similar to what a child does. They're born, they don't start speaking. All right? They start by observing, listening, and then at about 18, 19, 20 months, I think the average worldwide is 21 months, people start speaking. Now, are there some who start speaking at 36 months? Well, sure. Right. And some who start at 18 or less.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's, in spite of what some magazines and things like to publish, no one's born speaking. All right. So that's the basic concept. And it's as if let's say from 0 to 100, the speaking point is 65%. Then however long it takes you to get to that, then at 65%, your speaking begins. Now I'm going to define, what does it mean speaking begins?
Okay.
When I say speaking, what we mean by that is making your own unique sentence, not just a simple yes, no, maybe, but actually improvising a sentence.
Okay.
And it not a highly complex one, not with highly complex vocabulary, but improvising your own response or question.
Okay.
Now, to give a bit of like a picture or a context around this, my own experience was that after a solid year, 13 months of classes in the ALG program, my speaking was almost non-existent. And I didn't realize at the time why I felt like I should be speaking. But I did realize after why it didn't start maybe when we thought it should. But I'll talk about that in a minute. After I was out of the classes for another year and a half, so a total of 2.5 years, right? I got to a point where I felt like I could say anything I wanted to. I wasn't hampered. I wasn't uncomfortable on the phone. Now, was my language perfect? Or was everything I said coming out the way I thought it wanted to, or the way it felt like it should? No.
Right.
But I was able to communicate, and I would use the word freely on my side.
Right.
Now, people could struggle and try to understand what I was saying sometimes, and I think that's normal. If you ever talk to a 3-year-old,
right. The key is that's not the way it's going to be the rest of the time. It's evolving, growing, and adapting.
Exactly. And I think that in everything we've ever said and talked about, this is always the big question that we've never really tackled head on, to be honest.
Right.
Because it's for most of the people we talk to, it's too far into the future.
Right.
It's too just half of it doesn't make sense yet.
Not anymore. We have some people who
now. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Right. So that's good. what I could also say about that experience was, why didn't I start speaking when it was supposed to start? It's because I was focused on listening. I wasn't doing anything. The classes I was in, and I still subscribe to this, I don't think you need to take classes for speaking.
Right.
What you need are real life situations, online or offline, where speaking is required. And not in a classroom, ideally. So classes, it's always this thing of I'm being looked at to see how well I speak in comparison to someone else. And I think that's just a total negative. But if I was with a group of friends, which if I'm spending all my time listening, I'm never with my friends. If I'm with a group of friends who are Thai and they're all talking and I'm sitting there, right? Those situations didn't occur during that first year. Once I finished school, then they started occurring more. Right. And that was sort of a key. If I'd have done that earlier on, divided my time between listening and then getting into situations where speaking could occur, then now in Thailand, we had this conversation many times in our school. Why don't we create classes where people could kind of, I don't want to use the word practice, but in fact, it's just be in situations where speaking is happening.
Right.
And I said, we're in Thailand.
There you go.
If people don't have the ability to create this in their own life, we aren't going to fill, we're not creating value by trying to fill that spot.
Right. However,
if they don't,
now there's a lot of people outside of Thailand, so there is some value there.
Sure, I'm interested in that, and it's a bit bigger discussion probably than we're going to take on right now. But I'm very interested in seeing if we couldn't create, even an online network or something where you link up with Thai people who are interested as well.
Hey, David, because you're going to be pumping out some very valuable information.
Let me get that bird out of here.
I'd like it to be squeak free.
Alexa,
please.
Take your bird away, please.
Thank you so much.
He is unpredictable.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, sweetie.
Yeah. So kind of, David, if I could, I'm seeing there's two aspects, right? And you need both at the right time. So at first, it's about getting input, right? And then what we need to talk about today about what you were talking about a week ago when we talked on the phone, interference, right? So how the getting of that input might be conducted in a way that will affect the output later. That's one key. So there's the input stage in the beginning, getting that input, and then the quality of the input, the quality of the recording of the input, right? And then later, once you have the input, there needs to be stimulus to where that input can be automatically used. So say like if I or anyone, like maybe Katrina or anyone listens to thousands of hours of Thai, and they're at the point where they've got the whole map of the language in their head, basically, but they're in Norway or Texas or Zimbabwe or wherever, right? And they have no Thai friends or no Thai family, then that process of the language naturally emerging and evolving through conversation and interaction with other people is not going to take place, at least not as it should, to achieve the desired result. Is that what?
So there's right. So how do we start with all that? When all right, so one advantage, we talk about interference at another point, perhaps.
Okay.
The idea, we assumed, all right, that in this learning method, early years in ALG, the assumption was people would be able to listen and build up hours, let's say 300 hours,
Mhm.
take a break. Let's say the break was 6 months, and come back after 6 months' time and pick up where they left off.
Okay.
Now, what we actually found was that anyone who was taking more than 2 to 3 hours a day, so let's say it was more than 10 hours a week, that time away actually produced higher learning ability.
Did being in Thailand have any?
Listening, not learning, higher listening ability.
Right. Yes, I understood that. Did being in Thailand have anything to do with that? Do you think they were? No. Okay.
No.
Right.
So let's take all of your input in class, in Thai, and whatever.
Okay.
Let's say it was Thai. It could be any language, right? But let's say you're getting input at more than 3 hours a day, which in real life, right?
Yeah.
That's probably a pretty good average for kids.
Okay.
Natural language input for a baby is not going to be much more than that, if that.
Okay.
So if you think about you're doing 4 hours of input daily, you take a month off. There's a digestion process of some sort. I call it digestion just for a mental kind of way to get my head around it. But something continues happening in your brain that increases your ability to listen and understand during that time away.
That is amazing. That's really
with no additional input. There's crazy. Still this process happening in your brain that allows you to come back after a break of no input.
Yeah.
And be at a higher level. We've seen that consistently.
Okay.
All right. The reason I'm talking about that right now is because what that means to me is that in speaking, if I'm listening for a year solid and then I start thinking, all right, well, now I've got this 70%, I should be able to speak. Well, there's 2 or 3 things that are happening, and one of them is your brain's still processing what it's taken in.
Got it. Yeah.
All right. Now, let's say all of that's been processed and your brain is up to speed, right? There's something else when we talk about speaking that hasn't happened yet. All right. So whenever we get to this point, we say, all right, well, speaking's begin and it's not begun, and you keep listening. And so you've gone past that point and whatever. You're not forgetting anything. You're not losing anything. But what's still missing there is this gap between what is in your head, what you've heard, what you've taken in, and what comes out of your mouth. If the vocal cords in your mouth and everything haven't yet worked out all those sounds that are in here clearly in your head.
Yeah, right.
That takes time to develop that.
Yeah.
And that's true in a vocabulary sense, that's true in a grammatical sense, and that's true in a phonemical sense. So all of those aspects need some output out of your mouth back into your ear, and it's like you're comparing what's in your head with what's coming out of your mouth, and you've got this adjustment to where it's got to line up.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense.
When I started speaking, I realized very quickly people love to correct you. And 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, I knew what was being corrected before they said it. It was like, as soon as I said something, I could hear the difference before they could correct me.
Right. Yeah.
And
you
so
knew
the correction didn't, it was sort of like oh yeah, I know that. And next time, and there was a moment where I had to just shut off my own moderation of that, and the whatever they said, it was more like water off a duck's back after a while. I didn't want to be rude, but it was okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Let it,
and never paid attention to it because it's just distracting. My brain was already doing all that without my help and without their help.
Would it be okay? So that makes great sense. There's kind of a process where the you're unconsciously kind of first off physically connecting, hooking up the language part of the brain and the language muscles and all that, and then also there's still getting in input and integrating the input you got already, and
Yeah.
naturally kind of so. Katrina has an interesting question. Would you advise someone who has gone for, say, 14 months straight to take a break, or is that processing happening whether you take a break or not?
The process is happening whether you take a break or not. And I always recommend breaks.
Mm.
No matter how much you're doing consistently, and I think no matter what you're doing on a regular basis,
Yeah.
a schedule shift up is a healthy thing.
Mm.
So just to give you kind of a point, one of the reasons I'm in Texas now is to help look after my parents. I'm sharing that responsibility largely with my brother. There's certain roles I have, certain roles he has.
Yeah.
And we continually look at and make changes to our schedule. Hey, can you cover me tonight and I'll cover you tomorrow? And the making that a regular part of our schedule is really helpful.
Yeah.
And it's like the weekend in a work schedule.
Mm.
So take breaks and then come back at it. Stay fresh. Because one of the hardest things in this whole program that I found was staying fresh in it. And now in Thailand, that was especially true. I always encourage people, stretch out, get out into the provinces, travel a bit. It's not expensive. Get lost once or twice. Best place to get lost in Thailand is in Isan. They're very hospitable. It's just in the Northeast. They just take care of you. Always something to eat and a place to stay. But just, the experience of changing up what you're doing, and especially if you're in a country where the language is spoken, what you come back with is well worth the time away. Mm. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So
find a way to stay fresh.
Take a break, but go to Thailand to take that break.
That's right. Go to Thailand. Yeah.
Okay. So connecting back to the more on the topic of output, what have we got so far? We got you're listening to a certain point, it's processing. Should we touch on interference during input, or should we get more towards, because I think a lot of people, they see when the output first emerges.
Yep.
And they see how crappy it is, and they don't really think about, okay, look.
So hang on. Let me. What you're talking about is big things. So output emerging is usually us trying to make something happen on the speaking side of it. Mm-hmm. All right. What we can see clearly is if someone, let's say it's in Thai, I assume people here are familiar with Thai, right? And someone asks you a question in Thai, and you just want to give a simple answer. Very quickly, as you learn Thai, the answer of chai or mai chai is right there. It's like you don't even think about it, and it's there. For me, that's the rule of when to start speaking. If you don't have to pre-think what is it I've got to say, use it.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. Okay. So as a basic rule, when should I start speaking? Well, that's when. Now, I don't qualify an answer like chai or mai chai as speaking, right? Because that's not a unique, sentence I just made up without pre-thought.
Right. So that may be as early as a couple hundred hours or so. But
exactly.
Real, like fully complete sentences, that will be, for say an
improvised sentences.
Yeah.
Without pre-thought, that's a definition for speaking. So yeah, let's say that happens at 700 hours, and then you are actually in an environment at that time where speaking will automatically take place.
Yeah. And you think 700 hours is a good estimate for that, but it's not gonna happen all the time, right? It'll pop out here and there a little bit. It's not like you're gonna have a. It's just not like you're gonna have a conversation.
Your understanding is at 70% of what's happening, and you're just starting to interject sentences here and there.
Okay.
Now, for the people around you, oh, you've been talking for a long time, and you should say more than that, right? They don't understand. Parents push their kids the same way, and give them stuttering problems too. So I mean, it's you never want to be in the mode of, is this right? Right? You never want to get into this mode of let's see, how should I say this? Not in terms of looking for what you want it to mean, but in terms of which Thai word should I use here, and what's the way to say that word. That kind of thinking, I think, is just, you should just stop. Use something else.
Okay. Can I summarize what I think I understand from this? It's not about the hours. If you have 5,000 hours and you're thinking about it and you're forcing it, it's wrong. If you have 800 hours, not wrong, but it's not going to lead to the best results. It's not optimal. If you have...
Are you talking about interference?
Well,
okay. All right.
I'm trying to summarize what you were saying, where you were saying, okay, look, any output that comes out automatically without pre-thought, as you were saying, is part of the process. Whether it's right or wrong in the moment, it's part of that evolving process, and eventually will lead to good results if you continue the process. Whereas anything forced, no matter when it's forced, is going to be bad for that process.
It creates interference.
It creates interference.
Creates interference.
Which we haven't defined yet or talked about, but would be good to talk about.
Yep.
Are we ready to talk about that? Or
let's talk about interference.
Okay. All right.
This idea of interference is probably the area where we've received the most anger and opposition, and just all kinds of criticism and stuff. Interference is what happens when you use conscious thought to try to do what your brain already does on its own.
Okay.
Right? Our basic understanding, not that we understand exactly how all that works, is that what the brain can do unconsciously, and especially with language, it does a whole lot better than what the best of the best linguists can do working it out structurally in their head.
Right.
And there are some pretty good linguists out there who can memorize and reproduce and get it all accurate, but it doesn't flow naturally. Now, early on, that natural flow is very limited. Right. And so it's always this balancing act between, well, I'm not supposed to pre-think at all, so I'm not going to say anything, or getting out there. It's like it's a little bit like learning to swim, and you get some instruction, and then you get out there in the middle of the water and you realize, oh, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not doing that right, and then you make an adjustment and start to sink, and you go back to doing it wrong just so you can keep afloat. You learn how to dog paddle and get from A to B, and then someone gives you a swimming instruction, and as soon as you stretch your legs out behind you, you start to flounder, and it just that whole learning process is important, but you can't do it if you're not in the water.
Okay.
And for me, that's the analogy. I think when speaking happens, what I would like to say about interference on the speaking side of it is just don't try to work it all out. If you can hear it and you know it, you know it.
Okay.
If you don't, just keep listening and you'll get it.
And that might be hard for a lot of people who are living in Thailand and have Thai friends to do.
Oh, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, over the span of a long time, like a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. So my time in the listening classes where interference is consciously thinking about this sound, that sound, trying to define it in my head.
Yeah.
I'd turned that off already. So when it came time to speaking, people who wanted to correct me were already like, I'm not listening to you, even though I'm going to be polite and act like I am,
Right.
you know, oh, thank you. And then go on. I just literally never got stuck on that after the listening classes.
Okay.
I was sold on that idea of interference, and I was convinced that I couldn't work it out as well as my brain could on its own. So
Yeah.
I never took 3 months of it took 3 months of listening before I got settled into that. And then once I settled into that, I don't think I've broken out of that for the rest of my life. It's kind of a fun place to learn in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lower stress and better results. It's
yes. And not for everything. There are some things that take work and practice.
Yeah. But not something that for which the brain can do automatically, like, learning a language.
No. Yeah, exactly.
It's not going to happen with calculus, but
No, it won't. But the concepts of calculus can come that way. And I find that once you get the concepts, then the
calculation's easier.
Calculation's a lot easier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let me check here. So this kind of touches on what are some of the common problems that occur and how to avoid them. So can all of the problems that come in the process from input to output and eventually reaching, again, we're going to talk about the definition of this concept, near native, right? But from getting to where you got nothing to getting to where you have, obviously you're always evolving, right? You're always learning, but you're getting to a point where you can basically say, okay, I've reached a high level in the language. Can all of the problems that can occur in that process fall under the umbrella of interference, or are there other problems that might happen?
Yeah, no, not everything is interference. I've seen often, I wouldn't go so far to say always, but I don't know of any exceptions either.
Okay.
If someone has a certain characteristic in their speaking their native language, for example, if I express myself in a certain way that people find unique, it could be anything. It could be being very structural in my thinking and explaining everything. I find that those sort of characteristics carry over if you're learning a second language this way, which I find interesting.
Such as
the way you express yourself doesn't change.
Okay.
All right. I don't know that even if you want it to, it tends to be the same. If it's naturally learned like this. Now, if you've learned in a language and it's not, through listening, then that doesn't hold true.
Okay. So hold on a second, David. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about accent? Are we talking about just like if you're a harsh person?
Not accent. Harsh would be an example. Stuttering would be an example. Okay. Always feeling like you got to explain everything would be an example.
Okay.
Even though, I tend to be a bit technical about things, a bit logical, a little bit like in Thai settings, that can drive people wild.
Yeah.
Because they don't think that way.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, my expression isn't Thai at all.
This is an interesting, if you would let me.
I can talk with Thai engineers all day and be happy.
Right. This is a cool thing because this gets into like where language and culture kind of separates. So what it seems to me like is you pick up the language this way, but there's some level of culture which kind of gets into your personality that's difficult to pick up, or at least difficult to evolve.
I don't think of it as culture, and I don't think of language and culture separately either.
Right.
But there's a certain personality
Yeah.
that isn't culturally prevalent, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I think there's definitely it's not a black and white thing. But
No, that's true.
But I think there's some aspects of a culture that could be considered more like that are related to personality. Like, are you a direct person, or are you somebody that you beat around the bush? Things like that.
So if I think about the differences between German and Thai culture,
Yeah.
right, I would tend more towards the German side. Okay.
For sure.
And now you put me with good Thai in Thailand.
Right.
That doesn't change my expression of myself in Thai to be more Thai. It doesn't have an impact on the fact that I think and act and talk probably a lot more like Germans than I do Thais.
Yeah. That's
even though my Thai can be fluent, my expression of myself is still more on a German side of things.
And I wonder, it's just like, random hypothesis, but that the language learning is kind of like a superficial aspect of culture, and then deeper down, mannerisms and other like ways of thought and being are more like deeper levels of culture, and that it takes more input to get that, and you get more interference from your original imprinting of culture when you start digging. But I wonder if someone who was, say, 20, they were 20, they were raised in America, spoke only English, and then say they were thrown into an African village and lived there. And this maybe was before the internet, like 100 years ago or something. They're thrown into an African village and they lived only in that language. They picked it up like quote unquote barefoot language learning, like natural ALG, right? Without the teachers. And then they lived there the rest of their life for like, or at least another 50 years. When they're 70 and more European explorers come and find the person, will they find the person's mannerisms and thought processes to still be European, or to have greatly changed toward the way the village does it? And I think it's second.
It's both.
Yeah.
Almost for certain. So I moved to Thailand when I was 27, and I lived there till I was 62.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from coming back here to the States, things I used to love about it, I virtually hate.
Yeah.
Some things.
Yeah.
Right. It's not so much that I've forgotten. It's just I've changed.
Mm.
Now, does that mean for Thai people, I feel like I'm tied to them? I don't think so.
No. Yeah. I've had the same experience with Chinese.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure you both change and you stay the same.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So unless you have anything else to add to that, it's kind of a tangent, but it was an interesting one. Mm-hmm. Once words and simple phrases start coming out naturally, would shadowing be all right? Or would that still cause interference?
Shadowing is... What is shadowing? Let's define that.
Okay, so Mike, if you have a definition of shadowing, you can add that. But what I know about it is, say, what you would call, David, parroting, except for on a very systematic and large scale scale. So let's say you choose somebody. This is what I understand from other methods, like say various mass immersion methods. That once you get to the outputting stage, you'll choose someone who's kind of like a language parent or someone you want to mimic. And then you'll listen to a lot of their content, and sometimes, like maybe a little bit every day, 30 minutes or an hour if you're super hardcore, you will try to repeat everything they're saying when you get like a clear recording of them or whatever, a clear YouTube video where they're speaking clearly and some not still full speed, but maybe not crazy fast and slurred. And you repeat everything they're saying, trying to repeat everything they're saying as they say it to match the accent. And they have some really cool setups for this. Like really ingenious stuff where you got these headphones and you're listening directly to the microphone or whatever from the computer, not actually listening to yourself, because then there's like interference with sound in the head or whatever. And to try to get as close to that sound, that accent as possible.
Why?
Okay, here. Okay, we have a definition from someone who's done this. Okay, I haven't done it. Shadowing is nothing more than repeating a sentence with a recording immediate after or even simultaneously until you. There you go.
Okay.
And Mike says, okay, right. Okay,
good.
So
all right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, good. So I'm not familiar with it as a learning technique. So my first thing that comes to mind is, why would you want to do that? I know in listening that what we call recreation is very, very powerful. And it means that basically when you want, one of the things, our speaking happens so fast, intercommunication happens so fast. And people generally are trying to bolster their own position with someone else, and they're not really listening, but thinking as the other person's talking about, what am I going to say next?
Yeah.
Responding to keywords and flashpoints and so on. That a very powerful listening technique in communication is recreation. But that means first I've got to hear what you said, and then I say it back so that you know I've heard you.
Okay. So recreation is, I listen to you and I say back what I've heard you say.
Yes, but not in a sense of parroting, but in a sense of
the meaning.
You understand. It slows the conversation way down, but it opens it up to further and deepen. Now, for listening, that's something that is very, very powerful.
David, you asked the shadow, the people who are talking about shadowing, a question: why would you do it? So here's the goal: it imprints perfect grammar, and my vocabulary apparently is
prosody
up to par for at least that sentence. If you do it enough, it helps general ability. The point, and one more definition or a goal. The point is to imitate the pronunciation and intonation by mimicking the native speaker, usually done with an audio recording, blah, 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 accompanying.
Got it.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. I get it.
Yeah.
So if you So let's back up to listening and how much listening is enough.
Okay.
When a child starts speaking in natural language settings, does their brain have all the proper grammar in place yet? Or do you think that's something that works out as they start speaking, they gain more grammar, it deepens and blah, blah, blah?
Definitely the latter.
Right. At the end of the day, though, the grammar they use, is it the grammar they're immersed in or something they've learned in other means?
Immersed in, for sure. Absolutely.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's true for accent, and that's true for not pronunciation, it's true for vocabulary usage.
Yeah.
And everything about the language they use.
Yeah.
It all comes from the environment they're in.
Yeah.
Now, teachers can try to impact that.
Mm-hmm. But that's already they're already way into the habit and the process. They're
10 years old already.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would come back to the idea of whether or not.
Oh, David. Oh, sorry. You go first. Sorry. My bad. Go for it.
There's a lot going on.
Just like I
would come back to whether or not this sort of a practice is more efficient somehow than the natural process, because it's not a natural process, that we can say for sure.
Definitely.
And
can I interject something? We're talking about we're comparing to native speakers, right? Things native speakers do. So we know for sure, one, just looking at native, the way anyone acquires their native language, we know that with input and time, this process will naturally bring you to whatever your input is. So that we know. It takes some time. It's a process, which can be frustrating for us, especially if you're, let's say, 60 years old and you're like, well, how much longer do I have? But we do have cases of native speakers doing shadowing. I know, like, say, people from the hills in Kentucky and West Virginia trying to speak like the guy on the 6 o'clock news, and it's even in some country songs. I learned how to speak like the guy on the 6 o'clock news. There's examples of that.
Well, in Thailand, I could remember going, and I always liked live music, and sometimes you'd get Filipino bands, and there were a few people who would sing, and they'd sing a Thai song, and I couldn't tell they weren't Thai until they came and had a conversation. And vice versa too. I heard some Thai singers in this one band I remember, and they their pronunciation was excellent. The whole song. Invite them over to the table, and they couldn't have a conversation.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that's one aspect. I think parroting as a rule creates good parroting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it has an impact on language. In a natural flow sense.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a lot of work. So talking about, you're already investing a lot of time to get the input and then the natural interaction, and then you add the shadowing.
So let's back up a minute. When I first said, well, why would you do it? Usually these things are made up either out of an idea, and I don't know how deep the thought goes, or let's try this. Okay. But I'd like to back up to, well, what are we trying to fix here? So if I can, through listening, get everything I need in my brain to speak fluently, then in order to start speaking, what have I got to do? Now I know I can get everything I need in my head from listening.
Right.
That's how it gets in. Watching and listening, understanding, that gives me the whole thing.
Right.
So what do I need to use it?
Yeah.
What do I need to do to use it?
Correct.
And
yeah.
be fluent.
Why we're here today is to talk about that, right?
What are we fixing?
Yeah.
Well, right. So for me, that's the logic that I would use. And I don't think trying to repeat someone else, unless I wanted to learn to give a speech or a song. Now, for a song, it makes perfect sense. If I want to sing a song and act like, I don't know.
I'm sorry, David. I had to do something over on the comment. And we do have some very interesting questions if you want to tackle those whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, on our set of questions that we said we'd talk about.
Yes. So
the basic thing is the last one that you've got here. Optimizing acquisition process.
All
right. Let's talk about that for a moment. And then I think we've covered everything we said we'd do.
Yeah. Okay.
If I want to acquire language, I don't know of any way more efficient than being part of experiences. So if I can break down language in my head, it is happening upon happening upon happening upon happening where that language is used. Okay. And I was a part, I understood what was going on. That is language inside your brain. It's a memory of something that happened. Someone said something, you understood it. And that creates language in your head. Now, the more that you get, the more language you're going to get. The more broad it is. So I wouldn't choose one parent, I'd choose 50. Right? The more broad it is, the more broad your language capability will be.
Yeah.
All right. If you want to talk like a woman in Thai, just have women teachers. Don't ever listen to men. And you will.
That's pretty damning for us because we have.
Well, you've got to think about it because that happens.
Yeah.
If those are your models, that's who you're going to sound like. And it's different, right? It's not all the guys and girls don't talk the same.
Yeah.
So, so all of that has aspect, but if I had 20 Thai people giving me input in Thai, I've got the Thai language up here.
Right.
And that's what I'm using to produce it. What's going to come out? It's very much that simple.
Yeah.
So optimizing that doesn't have much meaning other than if I'm saying I'm getting input and I'm sitting there dozing off, thinking about something else, not in that conversation, that's not optimal.
Right. Okay. Again, a little summary, if I will, just to check, make sure that
Right.
I got it. So as I'm understanding it, it seems to me that the process is super simple, super automatic if the correct conditions are there. However, it takes what feels like to most people who are adults in a busy, active world to be a ridiculously long time, A, and B, coupled with
Sorry.
no worries.
He's trying to bring the bird back. He can eat somewhere else. Don't bring him in here.
The bird is coming back. Get it out of here.
No, it's not. You gotta keep that bird out of here.
All right. So it's an automatic process given the right conditions, and you optimize the conditions. However, it's a long process.
So hang on. How much parroting would I have to do before I could actually produce a sentence?
Yeah. Oh,
I think that's longer.
Okay, David. Yeah. Yes. No, I agree. If you were actually going to do mass immersion the way they do it, where you study the language a little bit and then you dig into native content, you're spending an hour or so on Anki, flashcards, SRS, and then you do it. That is a long process too, right? But you're taking the way adults like to do, motivated, growth mindset type adults like to do. You're taking what looks like active control of the process, and that can.
Yeah. So you've hit on something that I prefer to avoid, right?
Yeah.
As a student, I'm basically lazy. If I can get something to happen naturally and get better results, then I will. Yeah. Now the fact is, in terms of everything I've seen, I haven't ever seen anything that can produce long-term results better or faster.
Yeah.
The only thing I can gain are short-term results, which also I don't care about. I'm not saying it's wrong to care about them.
Right.
Right. So I remember that government people coming to Thailand, they were often looking at our program to say, would this be appropriate for our workers? And we analyzed it with them and we said, no, it wouldn't. You guys come over, you need to use certain Thai phrases well. And socially, you don't really need Thai. And you can memorize those things in a crash course and do a lot better. And we're not going to do that for you. Find someone else, because there's a lot of people. That's what everyone else does. Yeah. So, and we lost that on purpose because our program isn't best for that.
Right. Different goal.
So I'm not saying it's wrong. And a lot of those government people wound up speaking some pretty good Thai.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So I'm not even saying it doesn't produce results.
Yeah.
I'm just saying if you want to be fluent, nothing beats nature that I've seen or even comes close.
Yeah.
In terms of time, efficiency, or
in everything, right? In everything.
Yeah.
Like we can do.
And then for a student like me who doesn't like to study, that's the winner. That's just like,
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going back to my overview here, as I understand it now. So it feels like you're in active control, which for a lot of people, that's a big deal. It feels scary to let go of control for two reasons. One, it just feels scary to let go of control. And two, even though this process has been around a lot on the internet, there's not a ton of examples yet of people who are at a high level, right? And if you can't see it, it doesn't exist for the purposes of your analysis of what you're going to do, right? So a lot of people say they get, and then you have to make that decision every day. You wake up, or and you start saying, okay, I'm going to learn this language. And obviously, for a lot of people, it's not the first thing to do in the day. But at some point in the day, they're like, I'm gonna spend some time learning this language. And it's you constantly, every day, you're making that decision. I'm gonna have faith that letting go of control of the process and trusting nature is gonna work when I'm not seeing 5,000 people out there that said, yeah, bro, I learned Swahili this way and I learned Russian and blah blah blah. And then they're speaking like you can't tell that they weren't born there. So I see that as the main issue here. And then so people are grabbing for control. What can I do to take control of the process? What can I do to make it faster? What can I do to, you see what I'm saying? That's the main issue.
Yep. I get it. I don't agree with everything. I think the examples of it are all around us everywhere. Namely, every one of us learned at least one language that way. And there are a ton of examples of people doing it this way all over the world. Not hard to find. Now, was it in a structured program like ours? Yeah. My guess, and I haven't done the numbers, and I probably should because I could do it. It just takes a bit of analysis.
Yeah.
But in our program, we had like 16,000 different students over the years that I have on record now. We had more than that, but I lost half of them.
Yeah.
So 16,000 is a big enough number to guess from.
David, I totally know where you're coming from. And for you, that's the reality. For somebody who just gets on the internet and looks for language learning, that's not the reality, right?
Okay. So coming from that standpoint, right? Yeah. I'm looking for a comparison that'll bring this home, because I don't I totally get where people are coming from.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're set on taking control of this whole process, this isn't a good method for you, period. It's just not. So something needs to get you interested in this as a method to begin with. Right?
Oh, David, I'm sorry. Yes. I interrupted you. You're talking about 16,000. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to regardless of whether it can be found on the internet, what was the actual numbers? What were the actual numbers?
I don't know, because I haven't run them all, but I know that around probably 90% of our students combined our program with something else. Now, for a time, as I started interacting with students, part of that 16,000, the things that were missing to really analyze. So for me, what was the God? As a student came in to our program, let's talk about this process a bit, because I evolved this way quite a bit on this whole idea. I think the God of what was for them in their language learning was, what do you want to gain out of the program? Uh-huh. It wasn't, here's the correct way to do it, this is God. No, not at all. Like with the embassy people, I don't feel like this is a method that works for every situation for everybody.
Right.
Right. Now, I had some people, very few, but some, who were sold on the idea and tried to make it work, and it didn't work well for them, a few. And those were people I was highly interested in.
Right.
People who would come to our program, which was probably the majority, and say, I want to do something while I'm in Thailand to help my language. I want to learn Thai for 6 months and use it while I'm here, and then I'm going to go somewhere else. That kind of a person was the majority of our students. Mm-hmm. How do you assess those results? What was important to them was, what they wanted was the ability to get around, do some shopping, interact with friends out at for dinner, and then go to Timbuktu or something. I couldn't honestly say, well, they were a failure for us. I know that we benefited them in certain ways, but it wasn't around becoming fluent at some point in the future. That was never their goal.
Right.
Now, unless we can find out what their goals were,
yeah,
right, we don't have a good way to assess that in terms of value to them.
Yeah.
Now we can assess it in terms of value to our program. In our program, it was somewhere around 10% of the students really came in and got committed and interested in, between 8 and 10, in what we were doing for the long haul for them. Now, is that a high number or low number? I don't know. I was never able to impact that by much. I tried a lot of things.
Yeah.
But it was always about the same. No matter what I did or didn't do, that number never really varied. So people came to us for all sorts of reasons. I felt like my responsibility was to make sure they weren't surprised down the road, right, by what they did or didn't get.
Right.
And so my conversations with students centered around, here's what we offer, here's what the benefits are, here's what aren't the benefits. So if this is what you're expecting, and I would often tell people, this isn't the place for you.
Yeah.
And so when you look at those numbers, what are we going to analyze there? It becomes very messy.
Gotcha. So wouldn't it be great? I don't know how to make this happen or if it ever will, but it would be great if we could get a cohort of, say, 20, 30, 50 people who are super motivated to become near native, but they understand the process and they're willing to do it perfectly. And then we track them over, say, 5 years and see what happens. That would just be incredible. Right? Wouldn't that just be a wonderful study to have happen?
We can produce some. I mean, I've got a pretty healthy number of people who have done that. I've got enough to where it's no longer a question, but it is very, well, what do? You put them up online, how do you show that off?
Yeah.
There's no way to say that without producing the actual people that doesn't sound like we're just blowing our horn and advertising.
Exactly. And that is
something we want to do. It's not as big as you think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in my understanding, that's a barrier to popularization of the method. From what I've heard people say, they're like, constantly I hear people say, where are the examples? Where are the examples? You see such and such who's a polyglot and he's speaking 5 languages, really high level or whatever. And this guy, he only speaks 1 or 2 languages, but he dug deep into it and he speaks near native or whatever, and so on. So, I mean, there's examples of other methods that are readily available. And this is one of the biggest things I hear people ask is where. Now, there are a few now on the internet. There's a guy from Dreaming Spanish, a guy who did Dreaming Spanish to Fluency during the pandemic, like lockdown time in England or wherever it was. And he went on, did an interview with Pablo and Beth, obviously, is on the internet now with some of her Thai, and so there's some examples starting to come out now, and I feel like if we get some people doing comprehensible Thai and ALG Thai and the other ones and so on, doing it with that goal and also doing it according to the method, that eventually there will be people on the internet, but and it's not just everybody who's good, who's done it well, is going to come on the internet, right? There's people who are like, I don't want to be an internet personality. So that cuts the numbers down even more. But I think if there were clear examples.
How many? All right. So this program, I guess at our height, we were doing about 800 to 1,000 student hours a day, 7 different levels throughout every day, 5 days a week, plus Saturdays. that was just a lot of people,
Yeah.
a lot of hours, right? A lot of teachers. And that was a whole different generation. If those people aren't dead, they're getting up there in years.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
So
I'm just saying, yeah.
it's a little bit of a generational issue as well,
Right.
right? Most of the people I know from the student days are of that era where it was dangerous to be known online at all, you know.
No, and it's still it's still a madhouse. Like people.
Yeah, I get it.
Online.
But there is a generational difference, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's a big obstacle. Does it make it worth or not worth the time spent? I don't know.
Right. It's only worth the time if you have something to sell. And with this method, you know, if you're just a guy who did it well, like the English guy, you get on there for the sake of the method and do a 30-minute, 40-minute interview, but you're not going to be like an internet personality. I mean, you just did the method and then now you live your life. But the people who take control of the process methods, they have something to sell. And so they got a reason to get on there and show off their skills. They're selling something. Right?
So you bring up this idea of show off is something that's almost innate to what we're doing. So let me see if I can talk about that too. In language learning, everywhere in the world, every language, there's this huge, like, I'm somehow a smarter than you person because I know 5 languages or 3 languages or even one more language, 2 languages.
Yeah.
And this ego thing is huge, a huge driver.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, our program, you come to it and we say, let go, stop trying, get the hell out of the way. Because you're getting in the way. Your brain can do it automatically. It's whatever, you've got this ability that you were born with. It's nothing about you.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard to take credit for that down the road when it produces really great results. And it feels, I'll tell you what it feels like when people say to you, oh, your Thai is really good. It feels like they're coming to me, oh, you have great English. What are you even talking about?
Right.
What does that mean? What do you mean I've got great English?
No, well, I've been complimented on that in China. Because specifically we had like 10 different teachers.
You worked at Chinese.
And
that was a compliment.
No. They were complimenting my English. They were
okay.
Because the other ones had accents that they found to be, you know, not pleasant to the ears. You know what I mean? And they were like, "Oh, we like your accent, right?" But
all right. Well, how often in Austin have you been complimented?
Never, right? Never.
And that would feel ridiculous if someone came to you in Austin and said, "Hey, John, your 100%. English is great." It's 100%. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like. Why? Because it wasn't about me. I was dumb enough and not smart enough to learn language, or even try to learn the language in the way that everyone tries to teach it. Yeah. To me, it's just like I knew I wasn't going to do it. I didn't want to. I didn't like it. It was everything about it. Plus, my earlier experiences doing that were a disaster with Spanish and Greek, and I just okay. So what am I going to do now? Going to Thailand? Right. I found this method where I could just buzz out, be there, but not be involved really, and this is fantastic. And I've said this often enough, but the best people in the program who've gained the best results, bar none, were a group of Swedes when the Swedish government was looking for cheaper ways to pay for people who were without work, unemployed people. They brought them to Thailand and other countries and put them in educational programs. When the Swedes, early 90s, found our program, they loved it. Huh. And we would produce whatever documents that the Swedish government needed.
Okay.
So we qualified. They would come and sit back in our class and then go and drink beer in the bars. And they just had a great time and did fantastic.
Right.
I don't think they cared about learning Thai.
No, yeah, but they were
That's
still
how
engaged with
detached-
the content, right?
That's how detached they were
Right.
from this idea of effort and taking control. You know, just no, I don't
That's
have
the
control. I don't want-
catch-22. That's the paradox. If you come consciously, willingly, you want to learn the language, and it's going to be hard to sit back.
Interference starts there.
Yes.
That's where the interference begins.
Yeah, for sure.
Just get interested in what's happening around you. That's all you need.
Beautiful.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of this, John, is the teacher side.
Okay.
Getting people to stop teaching the language and create interesting experiences is a huge challenge all by itself.
Definitely. Oh, the teachers
It's not something that happens naturally. And you can look at someone and see what they're doing and tell you, are they teaching or is this an interesting experience? And that's the criteria right there.
Yeah. Oh, Pablo is so, because I did Thai, not really ALG. I've done a few hours of ALG, but I've done it more like mass immersion. So I like all the beginner lessons and stuff. I haven't really watched too much of that, so I can't talk on it, which is kind of weird. But me and my son are doing Dreaming Spanish.
Dreaming Spanish.
And I can see Pablo is so good at just providing interesting experiences.
He's a master. Yes.
He is. And my son, like at first he was not interested in Spanish at all. I was like, why would I learn Spanish? You know, you're having me keep up my Chinese through input and whatever. And the way his mom was teaching him Chinese was so, it's like, no, we have to sit there and write 50 characters 50 times, you know? And so he was like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing another language. But he started watching Spanish. He was like, I love Spanish. I'm going to be amazing in Spanish. I want to watch 2 hours a day. And, you know, like he loves it, you know?
Yeah. No, Pablo has absolutely mastered and he's mastered it in the context of online.
Right.
And so that's something different than even what we were doing in the classroom.
Yeah. Definitely. There's a difference there.
Yeah. And, you know, so what he does is also natural.
Right.
So this whole idea of natural isn't just on the listening side.
Right.
Right?
Definitely. Well, definitely.
Now, so if we talk about production and output, what could we do to create some natural opportunities for output? Now, there's the challenge.
Yeah.
You link up with someone who's trying to teach you Thai and how to say it. That's just wrong-headed.
Yeah. And that's a huge topic, like for people who are outside of Thailand, because now that we have the internet,
we need to create a virtual reality space.
Interesting.
And use what's the word? The person you set up. Oh, come on.
The avatar?
Avatars, yeah. And set up avatars rather than our real selves.
Okay.
Interact. I tend to think that gets out of the way some of the stuff that's in the way when it comes time to having conversations.
Okay.
And it might be a real possibility for future development or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. Either way, that's a challenge that needs a solution at this point.
Yeah. However, connecting with Thai people who want to improve their English and are willing to just talk about stuff, you know, we could create a list of topics to talk about for both sides and just throw it out there and have a little network going. That might be worthwhile.
Yeah.
As long as it didn't take much time to manage that. You link up with people who want to, you know, interact and pass on stuff. I know that all right. So one other thing about outputting.
Mm-hmm.
If you spend 700 or 800 hours listening and then start speaking, there's something we have already put in the space that has to be taken out. This idea of listening without speaking for adults, let's just say it's not natural.
Right.
And so when you train yourself not to speak, Now it's time to start speaking. You've already pushed that down and automatically don't speak. Now you've got to open that back up. That's a bit of a challenge.
And so this is something I wanted to mention is that this is also one of the things people think about. And we got a comment that I took it away, but because it was a little lewd, but I definitely sympathize with the feeling behind that, and that is, look, guy, hey, we're not doing the natural way. We're simulating that. We're not really babies, right? And this content is not parents and siblings and uncles and aunts. This is content that strangers have made to simulate input. So to what extent is this process different, like unavoidably different from the actual original acquisition, the natural acquisition of your native language, right? So, I mean, I totally sympathize with that guy, but I had to remove the comment. It was a little lewd. It was a little like disrespectful, but the feeling.
No, so listen, I get that. No one's saying otherwise. All we're saying is that the more we can replicate the natural process, the better off we are.
Yeah.
So there's two things. There's this natural thing that happens out there that we've all been successful in once. All we say is the more you can replicate that, the better off you're going to do.
Okay. So then there's the question, what we're doing.
That question cuts at everything we do.
Yeah.
And the basic way I tend to view anything is, how would that fit into the natural process? Right?
Right.
Now there is a period of language development. I don't know if you call it language development. Little kids parrot what they hear.
Definitely. And I feel that. Me and my son feel that with Spanish. Like things will come up in our mind. We're not talking to somebody, but like we'll come up. And if we don't have sati, if we don't have mindfulness in the moment, like it'll come out and it'll be like, wait, what? I just said that. And if we have almost like maybe 50 hours or something. It's not real communication, but the words are coming out and we want to say them, but he's like, Dad. So, and he's so cute with it. He's like, Dad, silent period. Do not say that. And I'm like, oh.
So,
yes, sir.
So in Spanish at 50 hours, I would start to minimize that silent period.
Yeah.
You should probably even now start looking for ways to start expressing.
Really?
Yes.
Because there's a lot I don't know yet. Like I can't conjugate verbs. For like the verb to be, I know, okay, this is the way it is for I. This is the way it is for like.
Just look at a 2.5-year-old.
Yeah.
They're not doing a lot of that either. So what?
Right. Okay.
And they keep getting input and they keep using what they have.
Right. So if something comes up in my mind and it's okay to let it come out. I don't have to be like, no.
Hang on 1 second. I'm going to interrupt you. So let me keep that thought about coming back to this idea we're not babies.
Right.
Really, that's the whole problem. Because young children cannot do what we can. And all our program is saying, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Just because you can work it out in your head doesn't make it better. All the evidence seems to point to the idea that in terms of language development, what you can do mentally can't reach the level of what naturally happens. Right. So let the natural process work, get out of the way. That's basically, gotta stop leaning on my desk. That's basically the basic premise.
Right. That's the idea. Yeah.
Right?
Get out of the way.
So our whole program acknowledges all of that from the start.
Okay.
And we're looking at ways, how can we replicate it rather than coming up with something different? Why? because what we've seen is the more we can replicate that natural process, the better the results.
Oh, and this brings up a point here that we're talking about interference. And previously, typically, if you read a lot of Dr. Brown's stuff, interference is what happens, but the result of that interference is he was calling sealing, and that is framed in a way that a lot of people took issue with, right? Because you do see
take issue.
Oh yes, take issue. Thank you for the correction. I'll try to forget it.
But still take issue with it.
Yeah, definitely. So they take issue with it. So we see the results of effort, and so we know there is that. So what all that the interference and sealing is talking about is simply if you let it be what it will be automatically, right? So it could be no. So you're saying that even with effort, there's still going to be issues.
Oh yes. Maybe definitely I could say. So here's the thing. This is an example. Anyone who's taught language to foreigners as adults has seen this truth. I had this group of about maybe a dozen, no, maybe nine adult students who wanted to improve their English. They were all college grads. They had pretty good English. They wanted to improve it.
Right.
And I created a program for them. It was maybe 30 lessons that required a lot of practice, focusing on correcting things they wanted to correct.
Right.
A lot of it was very basic English things, pronunciation, areas where they were not, they felt not fluent.
Right. Okay.
They all excelled. It was a fun class to produce and to teach.
Okay.
They all enjoyed it and wanted to continue. And 6 months down the road, I saw one of my students who had become a friend as well. And I saw him. And we started talking in English. And our conversation was like he had never taken that class at all.
Wow. Okay.
That's normal.
Interesting.
That's what you always see.
Yeah.
Now, did the class help him? I mean, it helped me. I got paid for it. Right?
That's
I enjoyed it.
That's a huge issue too. That's why there's a lot of noise at all levels. The research side.
Look, the fact that it's a huge issue testifies to the fact that exists. Yeah. So there's it's a moot point for me.
Yeah.
You can talk about it and deny it all you want, but if it wasn't a huge issue, we might question, is it there or not?
Yeah.
The fact that it's an issue says it's an issue. I mean, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't really get anywhere denying that.
Okay.
Seems like.
Yeah. Okay. So it's an issue. And all right. So I think we leave the sealing alone because that's going to be a bloodbath.
Well, as controversial as it is, I've never found it a motivator for most people. Anyway.
Yeah.
So when you have people who are coming to learn Thai and you tell them you'll get better results this way or that way, yeah. Right.
Okay.
Either you want that and you're already motivated to get good results and you're looking for what produces them,
right? Or
you're trying to promote some method that you're already sold on and you're going to sit there and argue about it. I've never been successful, no one else I have is either, at convincing anybody to change tracks.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Now, I came into learning Thai with this idea in mind. I know what I've done in the past didn't work well for me.
Right.
And the other thing I knew was I wanted to learn and do well.
Okay. Yeah.
Those were the two kind of criteria. So I was open to anything.
Okay. And this worked well for you. And it worked well for many others who did it.
Well, all right. But the point is, I don't think anyone ever convinced me of anything.
Right. You're just open to it. You tried it, and that was it. Definitely. Okay. I feel you. I feel you, David. We have an interesting theoretical it's not necessarily theoretical, but we have an interesting question on this. Okay, so what about the idea that corrections can be acquired instead of taught? So you're going to correct them through some form of acquisition rather than teaching. What do you think about that?
Well, in the acquisition process,
Yeah.
right? Let's say there's shades of gray before something becomes black and white.
Okay. So if you catch it during that time, then it's changeable. Interesting. Okay.
So let me give an example. Oh, I don't want to get this far into the weeds. It's a good example, but we just leave it at that.
Okay.
It's a bit
okay
of a detail.
So David, unless you have anything else to talk about, I'd like to go through the questions that we have so far one by one. I'm going to come up here. So do you have anything else, or should we start?
No, I'm happy for.
Okay.
What do we have?
So let me come up here and try to. Okay, so that's about shadowing. There are times that I recognize the meaning of the words. Okay, so I believe this is a question independent of the other topics about shadowing. Okay, there are times that I recognize meanings of words that sound the same but are different tones. Do you consider this an interference if I recognize the tone difference every time?
Not necessarily. It could be the result of interference, and it could be the result of just the way your adult brain is working, and it doesn't have to interfere. What should happen when I hear a certain word that involves a certain tone as well is the meaning, the image of that word comes up.
Yes.
Now with ties, one thing that makes it fun to play with language, which most ties love to do, is when we make connections between words that they haven't ever connected before. For us, there's a clear connection on a way it might be spelled or something that ties have never made that connection because of the tonal aspects. And when you start to play around with that, ties love it. If you're using it in communicating, they hate it. It's in the way. But if you're playing with the language and making a comparison between two different words, they love doing that. All right. That's kind of a generalization, obviously. But you'll automatically notice things that connect in your head. They sound similar. The key is, do you recognize them when you're using them as separate? Do you separate them properly, or are they confused in your head when you're using them? Either hearing or producing. If you've got to stop and think which tone it is, that's a result of interference or just not enough listening. Probably the first.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything to add or ask about that. Interesting one here. So Mike says that some people say, can you say dad or can you say uncle? And they give feedback. Natural. I don't think it's necessary, but it happens. And maybe that's an aspect of people even not understanding the acquisition process and then doing that with their kids.
So, maybe, but something to say about that. A lot of things adults do with kids very, very quickly turn it into their own game. And that's the kind of question that kids would turn into their own game, I think. Or they just don't answer. You know, can you say dad? And they say goo goo gaga, you know.
It depends on the age of the kid and the personality.
You know, if they can,
yeah,
they'll turn it into a game or refuse, generally speaking. That's been my observation.
Okay.
Kids don't like to be showcased. And that's an obvious, like, we're not trying to communicate here. You're trying to get me to do something.
Yeah.
So what's the reward? Why would I do that? And, you know, if you want to throw in candy bars, they probably all do it. Yeah, all right, here. But I think generally kids will turn almost all of that kind of language into a game for themselves.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, I don't think it's a big thing. Definitely that's not necessary for learning the language. It's just something that happens for some people sometimes. Now, Kat has a lot of questions that I believe are kind of hitting around the same issue, and that is the idea of, let's say we give the process enough time. Will everyone eventually get to a point where their accent is really good, and a native Thai speaker, if you're talking on the phone and they heard the accent, would not know that it's a foreigner? Or let's say learners of Thai who've heard a lot of Thai and can recognize a good accent would say, whoa, I want to be like that. Is everyone going to get there, assuming they have minimized interference and they've had enough hours of both input and interaction? Or are there other factors going on that could prevent someone from reaching what we call, and we'll talk about near native separately, but what the average person, when they just think of the general idea near native, it's actually like, near a native. Does everybody get there?
Yes.
Okay, really? We can give just a definitive yes. Interference minimized, time sufficient, you're going to get there. Nice. Okay.
I've never seen an exception.
Okay. Sweet.
That's sort of like the same question as asking, my baby was just born 6 months ago. At 2 years, how likely is it they're going to start speaking?
Okay. No, yeah.
And by the time they're in kindergarten, how likely is it they're going to sound like they've got a Chinese accent instead of a, Latino accent? We live in a Latino area, so Latino is expected.
Yeah.
They don't get any Chinese input. How likely is it they're going to wind up with a Chinese accent here?
Wouldn't that be crazy? That'd be insane. All right. Let's see. Okay, so that was a conversation between two listeners, and then we got Kat again. Oh, this is an interesting one. Again, same idea, but now we're talking about the time scale. At what point is it fair to compare the speech of someone who used ALG versus someone who used traditional methods? Where do the graphs meet?
Great question. So there's so many factors, but let's just say they're Western English speaker learning Thai, 3 to 4 years.
Okay. As soon as 3 years.
Let me tell you guys a story that happened. This was, I had so many experiences that form a groundwork for us. When I moved to Thailand, I moved here with a friend. He got here 6 months ahead of me and jumped into a very traditional, all-out effort-based education of Thai program.
Okay.
So he was 6 months into that, talking up a storm in Thai when I got here. 6 months head start.
Okay.
We traveled somewhat during my first and second years here. So I'd been here maybe 6 months or 3 months. We took our first trip. We went into villages and talked with people, natives and stuff. He did all the talking. The first few trips, I had no idea what was going on. After I was here about a year, well, a little less than a year, maybe 8 months, I started correcting the answers he was answering. I could hear what they asked. I could hear what he said. And I realized there's a gap and I'd fill it in for him.
Nice.
But I couldn't say anything.
Okay, so you're hearing it, and then in English you were telling him,
hey, look, he's missing it, and here's what's missing, and I would fill it in.
Okay.
That was after I was here about 8 months.
Okay.
At about a year and a half, my speaking wasn't as good as his, but my understanding was getting it always, and he was missing it most of the time.
Right.
So there, it's a question is, if speaking is just about production, fine. But if you talk about communicating, I was probably already the better communicator.
Right.
And
First,
my
you have to
speaking,
understand, right?
well,
then
that's kind of the basis, yeah. Then my speaking passed his at about 2.5 years.
Okay.
But he was able to say more than me still.
So when you say you're speaking past his, by what metric?
Just the ability to communicate freely, I guess. It's always a bit of a difficult one, right? So same as defining what do we mean by near fluent or fluently.
Which I want to get to later, yeah.
We don't have to get to it and take a long time. For me, it's being able to use Thai like I use English.
Okay.
Period. And it's less about how I come across to them and more how it feels to me.
Okay. Which is exactly
his experience in Thailand and people I know who were like him, studied the same way, could really get worn out using Thai. They would get exhausted speaking in Thai.
Took a lot of conscious effort, right? So
took a lot of conscious effort, and it wore them out.
Right.
And I had never experienced that. They would think before they switched languages. I've never given it thought, and often have changed languages without realizing it.
Yes.
Yeah. Definitely. And that creates problems. The last thing I was ever able to do that he could do better than me was translate. He was always ready to translate. This is what that means in English. And I had to stop and think about how do we say that in English.
Right.
It was a big challenge translating. But expressing myself more freely, being understood more easily, all of that was mine from about 1.5 to 2 years. Always better.
So by any metric, by any standard, you would say by about year 3, you were ahead on everything.
Yes.
Okay.
And when he'd been here about 8 years, he came to our program because he had stopped developing and he tried everything to develop more. And he hit that idea of a ceiling. Yeah. And he actually enrolled in our program to see if there was something we could do. But when we analyzed it, we said, there's nothing we can help you with.
How many hours did he do at
it was probably 1,000, not counting homework.
Homework? So what kind of homework did he have?
Oh, every night. Hey, come over. Let's have a drink or let's make a hamburger or something. No time. Sorry, I've got to prepare for the test tomorrow. All that. His language test.
So wait.
When he was studying, he was in a traditional program where you had quiz every day. You had these tests. You had a lot of memorization, a lot of practice, a lot of writing, a lot of reading.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I thought that was 1,000 hours of AUA sitting there listening.
No, not at AUA. He didn't do any AUA.
That would have been way more interesting. Okay, so we got this guy who's hit a hard ceiling. He's been there a long time. Let's give him 1,000 hours of input. What happens?
See, the problem is he's got the vocabulary and he sits there and he's bored with it. So our program wasn't, I don't know if, all right, so something we've never really thought about. Could we design a program for people like that? And maybe we could, but our program wasn't designed for that.
Right. What if he just watched native content? Why did he just, he did vlogs or whatever it is. He did podcasts and
so let me give you an example from my own. I was going to talk about this earlier. There are 4 letters that are very similar in Thai. Sounds, the phonemic sounds are similar. And when they're used in Thai words, I confuse them all the time. And I can draw that right back to a time when I tried to grab onto those and figure it out mentally. And because in English, I don't have those distinctions, they've always been lacking in my Thai. I can hear them in an unconscious sort of way, but when I use certain words, it's not clear for me.
It's still coming out.
So it's like I stopped being able to hear them because of the interference I created.
Right.
And that's with me still to today.
That's really interesting.
Now, how do you undo that? I don't know.
Yeah.
The people who want to talk about ceiling, if you're honest about it, figure out how to unlearn something you've learned.
Yeah.
Unlink the idea that cat means meow or moo means pig, and then talk to me. How do you undo that once you've created that connection?
Mm-hmm.
And then carry that forward to all the many sounds, sausage is the same as S and stuff like that. Once you do that, you've got it that way.
So there in the future, there may be, with advances in neuroscience, you can like zap connections, right?
Awesome. That'd be awesome.
But not now, right? Okay, interesting. All right, I think that's good for that question, right? So the hard answer to this is about 3 to 4 years is a good time to. If you went 5 years, definitely you would see a major difference, right?
Yes.
Okay. You said that when I'm trying to make this. Okay. 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 All right. I think that's a conversation between people here. Do you have any sense for what gave learners the best results? Boom. Do you have any sense for what gave learners the best results as far as natural sounding accent? Beth, a former AUA student with a very good accent, attributed it to delaying output and a good ear.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what Beth means by a good ear, but she was in class as well as hanging around our office, which was all in Thai, for hours and hours and hours on end. So she got more input probably than she's even aware of.
Yeah.
And she didn't talk early on. She didn't even try. She wasn't worried about that. And yeah, I would attribute it to the same thing. The thing is, when I'm using English right now, I'm not thinking about how do I say this word or that word, am I? You are either, right? Well, where is it all coming from? That's the question you've got to get. Once you get that, then it's all really, really simple. If it's coming from inside me somewhere, well, where is that? All right. And you get down to the question of, well, how did it get there? The obvious answer is it got there through the experiences in that language. Now, one thing I know is that even though I'm not a baby now, I still learn new English words in exactly the same way. There are words in English I don't know. I hear them for the first time in a context. I get an idea of what they mean. I usually don't stop and look them up. By the second or third time I've heard that word, I've got it. I could use it.
Right.
And I see that happening all the time.
I have an interesting question about this as it applies to native language, your native language. Because I see in my son, in his development, currently we're doing homeschool. Eventually the goal is to get him into a better school than the one we have here locally, but it's a different topic. But so he's reading a lot, but also there's a test we need to take to get him into this school. And crazily, like a lot of these, it's a bunch of advanced vocabulary. So we're doing two things. Obviously, he's reading a lot and he's picking up words through comprehensible input. But if you allow me to, we are also doing some flashcards. Okay. Now, this is like someone studying a foreign language. And so the idea is we get just the general idea of the word, and he sees it in his native content, which is, reading his book, fiction, nonfiction, as well as listening to certain, teaching materials and so on. And so what's your thoughts on this? Like kids who, okay, I got to take this test on vocab but I don't have time to get those hours of natural input. I just got to burn it into my brain with the flashcards. What's the result of that?
So I don't necessarily agree that using flashcards is burning it into your brain in a different way.
Okay.
My only requisite would be, is he having fun with the flashcards?
Yes, occasionally. So he loves to show off.
So here's the risk you're playing. Here's the risk you're taking.
Yeah.
If he's not having fun with them,
yeah,
you're turning him off of something that could be useful.
Right.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But flashcards can be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Or they can be a big tribulation, right?
Right.
And that's up to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So if you can turn that into a game for him,
yeah,
those
which
flashcards become an experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of games based on words and their meanings that are hugely beneficial.
Okay.
And why is that important? Well, because that turns something that we would think is, got to be done by rote memory somehow into an experience, which makes it input. That's a benefit.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. All right. I think I can work with that. Some of those concepts.
Scrabble is another example of the same thing.
Right. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Excellent. So that was a tangent of my own. So we'll go back to the questions. And yes, the infamous question that we've already touched on a little bit. What does near native mean? Now, there's near native. Before I let you loose on this interesting topic, I'd like to say there's near native from the perspective of the person speaking, right? How does it feel? Do you feel like a native? Do you feel like things are coming up naturally? But there's also the objective thing, like actually what's coming out of your mouth. Do natives recognize that as something that's like, yeah, that sounds like good Thai, or is that like, no, that you're a foreigner, So two sides of the coin. What are your thoughts on both sides?
So my Thai is near native in that when I speak, Thais hear Thai that's good enough. When I say something wrong, they notice it in a big way. Okay. And I just say to them, well, there's some English words I pronounce wrong too. Don't worry about it. Because I'm not worried about it. Don't you worry about it. Once we understand what I'm saying and you're saying, then we're fine. Okay. So for me, that's near native and good enough. I don't want to get better than that. I don't care.
Okay.
So what that means is it's not like they're struggling to hear me at all.
Mm-hmm.
They understand everything I'm saying. And when anything comes out in a way that's not what they would expect.
Yeah.
Right? They notice it.
Okay.
Now,
and that's all. Okay.
What comes out in a way they wouldn't expect is generally my way of talking. I do the same thing in English, and usually it's with a bit of intention and on purpose.
Okay. So two things. One, interference. The other one is just personality that they're not used to, right? Is that the idea?
You could summarize it that way. That's a bit loose, but yeah. Right.
Okay. Right. We need to summarize it somehow. It's not going to be perfect, but
yeah, no, that's fair enough. It's generally the second one because my way of talking is on purpose, not Thai.
Okay.
Now I made a conscious effort or a conscious decision, not an effort.
Right.
When I was in Thailand, after a few years, I noticed the people who really did well there as foreigners were Chinese and Indian. And both of those groups never tried to be Thai. They never really were interested in assimilating in a sense of I'm going to try to sound like you, look like you, act like you.
Right.
So I thought as an American, well, how much sense does it make for me to try to do that? And I decided it doesn't make any sense at all.
Okay.
So even though there's this appreciation for people who learn the language and assimilate, which I've assimilated, my American friends tell me I'm the most Thai, non-Thai they know. But all of that for me has no meaning. What's important in Thailand is that we are Thai and you are not. And I didn't feel like that was a bridge I ever wanted to cross anyway.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, I'm totally satisfied. Now, for me, on my side of it, fluent means I use Thai no differently than I use English.
Right.
So when I speak, it's the same. For me, it doesn't make any difference. And I'm not doing a different process. I'm not like some people who've learned with a lot of reading say it's like I see this, these letters going by and all of that. None of that. There's however it feels for me to use English, that's how I feel using Thai.
Yeah. I've had a moment, where like I'm listening to Thai, and one sentence, there's words that come up that I've acquired through the natural process, and an image flashes. And then the very next word is one that I learned early on through effort. And I see like the English word and like kind of I don't know if it was an image, but just an understanding of the tone and like things that I learned with that. And it was really surreal. It was like, oh, wow. Like both of those juxtaposed really struck me. Right. I was like, wow. Yeah. It's different. It's very different.
The way it feels is different. And the last thing that for me is the most important. So what's that say about me? Absolutely nothing. I'm just very average. I've done what all those other people in Thailand have done and no better at it. There's nothing that I can take credit for other than just putting the time in.
Right.
And that to me is kind of big. From a standpoint of coming into this, like I've got to be something special to learn Thai well, to realizing this is something anyone can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, I hear you for sure. That's and especially like online, sometimes you can see the ego from a mile away. Not all the time, There's a lot of cool guys, but what does near native mean? We kind of touched on that. Now this one, I like she forced the issue. So there's what we feel it to be and how we feel it to be, the subjective feeling, which is important to a lot of people. But then there's also a lot of people that even if it's not about ego and whatever, it's about fitting in. It's about getting good reactions from other people and not feeling like an outsider. Does near native mean will be mistaken for a native on a regular basis? Like a lot of people do really care about accent. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And things like having good tones, like at least 99.99% of the time, and things like that.
So if you're familiar with French culture, and language, it's very important to the French that you speak their language well. And they make it clear that that's important to them. And if you don't speak it well, better not even to try.
Wow. Okay.
So there's this, and Thai are like the French of Asia. So for the Thai people, speaking it well is very important. I get comments about how good my Thai is enough to be annoying. When I'm not understood, it's usually almost always back to this idea of how I'm expressed. What I'm trying to say is a foreign concept more than it is language related.
Yeah.
And I don't let go of that. That's just, I'm holding on to that.
That's
part of my identity.
You're right. Gotcha.
And at the end of the day, the Thai don't want me to be Thai.
Yeah. Right. You'd be a dancing monkey or something, right? Not an individual with your own.
We are Thai and you are not. And that's obvious as soon as you can see my face. So
that's in a lot of
phone, do they think I'm Thai? Often enough. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Right. Again, when I start expressing myself like myself, this guy doesn't sound Thai.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
David, I think you need to be shadowing, buddy. Okay, I had to do it. I had to say it.
Probably.
Okay, next question. So that was something we dealt with at the time. Who have achieved levels of crystal. Okay, so here's a kind of like a traditional definition of near native from other, just a traditional methods. In linguistics, the term near native speakers is used to describe speakers who have achieved levels of proficiency that cannot be distinguished from native levels in everyday spoken communication. And apparently there was more, but it didn't show up here. So yeah. So ALG can produce that, right? We're talking maybe 3 to 5 years from starting point.
When Dr. Brown set this up, he was the linguist that can hear accents and tell your history based on how you talk. right? He was the guy. He was the master at that, and you don't even have to take my word for it. If you research anything about him back and so on, he wrote the books that were the structural books of structural learning. He was just that master linguist, which I'm not.
Right.
And his goal was to produce perfect Thai. That was the thing that drove him in his practice and everything and all of that. And he got to be about 87% fluent in his own Thai, in his own assessment.
Okay.
After living here for 50 years.
Damn.
And he said that I surpassed him after I was here for about 4 years.
Sweet.
His vocabulary was the kind of Thai vocabulary that Thai scholars would come and ask him about the meaning of a certain word in Thai, or how it was pronounced 500 years ago. Kind of, he was the scholar that Thai scholars would come to about their own language.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not necessarily communication, like everyday kind of stuff. Yeah.
Which, when you bring that into it, it put me off as a student. It put all the students off. You could walk right past him in the hallway, and he wouldn't acknowledge anybody. He would just walk past you. His head was in the cloud. He would be in thought. And he was confronted by that. He was a scientist of scientists. You know, that whole image you get of a scientist who's in their own world doing studies. And he was kind of like that. Partly on purpose and partly because he was shy.
Okay.
You could get him in the office one-on-one. He was great to talk to.
A real introvert, huh? And a real...
Very introverted. And it was a bit of a put-off for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I'm not introverted. I'm not... I don't know where I'd fall on that scale.
I think most people are in the middle of the spectrum somewhere. There's some...
Good, that makes me more average.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, me too. I have my moments where I'm introverted. Both. Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. Can we... All right. So now it is something that's very organic, and there's some level of natural output earlier, and then it grows and develops and so on. However, a lot of people, and it's understandable, are interested in some benchmarks, like at how many hours are we going to get to something that is, okay, can we roughly know how many hours of speaking one needs to bridge the gap between what he knows to be correct and what comes out? So and this, not just this, the question that was asked, but can we put some, for an English speaker, just as a benchmark? Obviously, it's different for all kinds of different speakers, but your typical English speaker, if they do the process well with minimum interference, they understand the process and they're doing it with minimum interference. What are our benchmarks? What are our times? Can we give, like, at this this many 100 hours, this many 1,000 hours, give or take, such and such is going to happen or tends to happen for most people?
Around speaking, I don't know how to do that outside of my own experience and maybe the experience of a few other students. Because, to be honest, I don't think we've ever looked at it in detail. For listening, yeah, but it's hard to talk about when I hear someone talk about their experience in listening, what they understand, what they don't understand, I can peg them on the graph. I mean, I know how far they've gone.
Okay.
Almost a T. But for speaking, we don't know how to do that, or we haven't ever tried.
Yeah, this is the new frontier, right? This is
yeah, it probably is. But if we look at the curve, if you've not seen the chart, I recommend you look it up. I don't want to take time now.
Okay, sure.
But it's like speaking, once you hit about 65-70% on the chart, speaking will begin, which means you're starting at 0, and it moves along that same chart, that same curve for you. So the thing is this: it doesn't move at the rate of your listening. It moves along at the rate of this is something that came up in my mind when we were talking earlier about that whole digestion process and so on. I should probably work out the math on that. It's going to be different. So let me give a story that happened I don't think I mentioned this in this conversation, but my daughters came to America from Thailand, and I think my oldest was 8 or 9, and my youngest was 5. So at 5 and 9, they came to they came to the States for the first time, spent 3 weeks, and went back.
Mm-hmm.
I had been their primary source of English input,
Right. Yeah.
for their whole lives. They never spoke English with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I could get them to talk to me in English, but they naturally would not.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, they always used Thai with me, and I would use English with them. That was our normal means of communicating. My younger daughter resisted that quite a bit. She didn't, she would often just turn it off and say, just talk to me in Thai. Because she saw it, I think, as a little bit of like, why are you talking to me in a language that neither of us know as well or can communicate in as well as we can communicate in Thai?
Right.
Right. So once they got here, within 3 days, they were both playing around, having conversations with people, trying, right? Their speaking was pretty broken, but they were enjoying the process. They continued that when we went back to Thailand consistently for about 3 months, and then on through, they continued to keep using it on occasion.
Okay.
They've come back, gone into school. My younger daughter still has more language issues than my older. My older daughter's doing very well. And that just sort of kicked them off in their, they weren't hampered by it. Now their grammar is continually grown, developed, and all of that. All I'm saying is we never really worked on any of the production.
Yeah.
And now they're in a situation where it's all around them and they're using it.
Yeah.
In our family, we all still prefer Thai. And at least for me and my daughters, I think we switched without thinking about it, right? We'll use both. My younger daughter mixes Thai and English, which is not normal in the same sentence. She loves playing with words and language, and she'll say things that aren't normal.
Right.
She's a bit of a child. But a lot of times says things that are funny, and she doesn't realize why they're funny, but it's because she's mixing up things that no one else would do.
Okay. So kind of to go back to the question, we can put hard hours on listening milestones, but there's not enough data to put hard milestones on speaking hours. However, we believe that it follows the general curve of the listening. So it will take
minus digestion, perhaps.
Okay.
If I can use that word from
sure.
earlier in the conversation.
Definitely. I would think of it as integration, but yeah, digestion makes sense. It's a nice visual there. I have not read. Okay, blah does not. I think we kind of answered that one. And that was conversation between viewers. Okay. Yeah, that was about something we talked about in the moment. I shared it already. When I actually. The tone is here. The 2 words that you heard. Okay. Having started with other unguided immersion, I'm not sure how to gauge what difficulty to I'm not sure. Okay. So this is for people who started with, it was still immersion, comprehensible input, but it wasn't, what I would call assisted immersion. So it's like, okay, we're going to try to jump into easier native content or whatever, or maybe we did a little bit of studying and now we're jumping into native content. And so there are people like that who are coming to comprehensible Thai and they're seeing all this relatively structured and organized lists of assisted immersion content, ALG content, and they were like, okay, so where do I start? So Matthew says, having started with unguided immersion, I've been unsure how to gauge the difficulty best to watch.
Got it.
I've recently become bored, 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 with B2. So I started B3, but I tried watching lower intermediate and can follow most of what's going on with occasional stretches of guessing. What are your guidelines or suggestions for people like that?
Okay, good. That's a great question. And everyone who continues in this program through a certain level, everyone comes to this issue of problem. When you're starting out with something easy, let me start with the first question. How do you gauge what's best for you?
Okay.
So let's start with that, and then we go into the other. The best way that I know is if it's below 70% understanding of what's happening, you get really hard to focus and keep attention.
Right. And that's not vocabulary or grammar. That's what's happening. That's the idea. Why? What are they doing?
I would never focus on what's the vocabulary.
Got it.
Or what's the even the level might not be so accurate.
Okay.
Your interests will define a lot of what you get or don't get.
Right.
And so I've known 10-year-olds who were interested in mechanics and could follow complex mechanical instructions on YouTube and in a different language, and they followed it all. It's just like they weren't doing it to learn a language either. They were just interested in the material.
Right.
So the first basic rule is follow your interests. Second, keep your understanding probably between 70 to 85, 90%. More than that, it does get boring. And don't be afraid to get into things that you don't understand the words at all, but you can follow what's happening. That's really gold. That's really good. And it'll broaden you out. Now, here's what I was going to say earlier. When you're starting out, you're starting from zero. And the first word you learn is 100% gain based on what you knew before.
Yeah.
Once you know 100 words, one more word doesn't feel like much more than a drop in a bucket. And when you know 1,000 words, one more word feels like you're not going anywhere.
Right.
Now, if you get to the point where you feel like you're not going anywhere, don't worry about it. There's not a 1-year-old child in the world who ever does, so don't you. Come back to our role model. Yeah. Or I should say a 2-year-old. They never worry about it, so don't you. And keep the input coming. Keep your understanding of what's happening at around 70 to 85%.
Okay.
And anything goes. Within that. Anything you're interested in.
Right. Good guidelines there. So it'll take a little bit of figuring out on your own which playlist and what videos in the playlist you want to consume. But you got to try to stay between 70 to 85% of what you're understanding and make sure it's not boring you to tears, right? Make sure you're able to enjoy it. This is mostly a process of enjoying experiences, not studying a language. So that's a thing you got to wrap your mind around too. Okay, so this is an interesting theoretical question, and I guess not theoretical, but it's an interesting question. How do you keep the silent period when you speak a language with many words similar to the language you're learning? How does ALG play in these scenarios?
So that'd be a little bit like Jonathan learning Spanish, yeah?
Yeah.
It just happens faster. The silent period probably you can't. There's so much crossover, right? So much similarity. The silent period's shorter, that's all.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I could get into it. It's a bit technical, but if you think about the grammatical and the phonemical structure of a language, the more similarity is, the faster, the shorter the silent period will be.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. There's from the same person, there is also another question that I believe we touched on it, and I believe the answer was no, but it's a very interesting question. I want to address it again, but briefly. Can you break a language foundation built on traditional methods and rebuild it through ALG? And the answer is, generally speaking, not that you have seen in real experience. It's if there's a way to do it, we don't know, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Tom. All right. Tom is joining us here. That's great. Hi, Tom. He asked, what exactly is interference? Maybe we can get some examples, types of that, what that might be.
So what we say interference is anything that we do that gets in the way of the natural process happening. So let's define what the natural process is as we understand it, right? This is not a scientifically accurate 100%, but I don't think it's far off either. So here's what I think happens. The natural process is I am in a situation, a word is used that I don't understand or I've never heard before or never been aware of before. And I become consciously aware of that word. Everything else I'm familiar with, that word is sticking out to me for some reason. And the conversation or whatever's happening keeps going. So the word shows up for me in a newspaper as I'm reading it, or in a movie as I'm watching, or in a conversation while I'm sitting around a table with friends. Nobody stops at that moment to define it, but the natural process is, if you feel like it's key, you might ask, what does that word mean? You usually don't turn off the movie or stop reading the newspaper to go find out. And all of this is normal, natural, and it happens for all of us. You have, through that experience, one context, one experience, we'll say, where that word occurs. 6 months later, that word might occur in a similar or not similar experience. So you have experience number 2.
Okay.
By the time you have 3 experiences where a certain word occurs as a native speaker, you've got a pretty clear idea of what's the word mean. Probably you can start using it, and it's yours by now.
Yeah.
All right. Those experiences could be separated by any length of time, doesn't matter much. The point is they connect in your brain based on that word. Another way your brain appears to be connecting language is through grammatical use. Another way is through word meanings. And so if I think about, no, let's not go into an example. I think that's clear.
Okay. So good. Yeah. So interference, there's
anything that gets in the way of that.
I'm having a lot of we have a lot of amazing questions. And David, I know we wanted to keep it to an hour, but as usual, it turns into a marathon. There's
can you break this into part 1, part 2, part 3? After the fact?
I guess I could.
Maybe you don't need to.
As far as actually doing it, I know both of us are crazy busy with our personal lives and everything else. And so this is kind of like at the end of this isn't going to happen again for at least many, many months, right?
Well, it could. We could do another one in 2 weeks or something. You can't, huh?
This was a big deal for me. My son is almost never somewhere else. My wife wanted us to spend this day, we will later, but
you are blowing it right now. You are really, really blowing it right now.
Definitely. Yeah. No, anyway, hold on a second. I'm experiencing a whole lot of interference from my bladder and I need to take a quick break. However, I do want to touch on a lot of these really great questions from everybody. What do you think about this, David? Could I give you just like 3 minutes to talk about what ALG tie is and what you guys offer? And I use the restroom, and I'll be back. We answer the question.
You want me to do a promo video, huh?
Yeah, please. Talk about whatever you want. If you want to juggle right now, go for it. Whatever it is you want to do. I'm gonna put you full screen, and I'm gonna use the potty, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
There we go. Yeah. So ALG Thai started in 1984 at the AUA Language Center by a man named Dr. Brown. And we set up the program there. I wasn't part of it at that time. He set up the program there. I entered the program in 1987 and was one of 5 students to go through the entire year worth of material full time. And out of the 5 of us, 2 of us did exactly what we were told to do. The other 3 mixed and matched and did other things. And we all 5 stayed on in Thailand. So we became the first set of guinea pigs, if you will, for the method. Since that time, I went back. I lived on in Thailand. I wanted to set up an English program based on ALG method, and went back to Dr. Brown and asked, could he help me do that? He recruited me to work with him in the Thai program. We set up a Japanese program. I started an English school separately. And so we had 3 different programs going at that time. And that has continued on at AUA, the language center in Bangkok, until the early COVID. We had dwindled through a couple of moves. The AUA sold their main center or moved out to rebuild it, and it wasn't built back yet. And then COVID hit, and the program basically just withered and died in that live setting. And so since that time, we set up an online. Now it's called ALG Thai Online, and it's not really thriving, not dying, but we're teaching with a minimum kind of a program at the moment. We'd love to develop it more, time permitting. But yeah, in our big days, we probably averaged 800 to 900 hours a day, and of student hours. So it was kind of a large program. We had as many as 300, sometimes more students per day coming through, and classes from 7 in the morning until 8 at night, sometimes 9. And it was a fun program to be a part of. AUA was, as a language center, was sort of a meeting point for a lot of people who lived in Bangkok in those days. So you wanted to find someone or get to know someone, meet friends, interesting groups of people would come and be at AUA for all kinds of reasons. And so that's what was a big driving force, I guess, behind us getting to be known even before ALG. And then one of the things that's of interest, I think, is that when ALG got started, we were already operating a thriving traditional Thai program. So we had students from all over studying Thai in a traditional sense with books. And we were known all over the world for being one of the premier Thai places to learn Thai. And people used our books all over the place. And in 1995, when I went back, one of the things I wanted to do, that ALG had started in 3 or 4 years, became about 75% of the overall program. So we had all these natural students and 20%, 30% who were studying traditionally. And these 2 groups were always interacting and comparing notes. And so one of the things we did between 87 and 95, when I went back there, was created what was called the structural natural program. And that was where we actually combined in a curriculum a bit of both. And we never were very successful, never had many good results from that. But we put a lot of effort into it. We always had better results with people focusing on one or the other direction, not both. Then we went to 1995. When I got there, I sold the team on the idea that we should only do ALG, cut the natural out, because that's what everyone else was doing anyway. And we went solely ALG. And the program developed from there quite well up through about the time we moved out of the building. So that's a bit of a short history. Now you can only find it online. I'd love to be able to get back into live in-person classes. That won't happen anytime soon, I'm sure, but that's still a possibility. Okay. Jonathan, are you there? No? Okay, I can't see your all's questions. So let me think of anything else. Oh, something of interest. I think of oh, are you there? Okay, I can't hear you. Is that a problem on my end?
Nope, that's a problem on my end.
Good.
All right.
We can save what's interest for later if you want. It's still of interest.
All right. So, yes, had a lot of stuff to do, including feeding the cat, as it turned out. So we have next one here. How many hours do you have in Thai, John, and how comprehensible is native content? Okay, so my own personal journey in learning Thai and acquiring Thai could be like a whole nother video that I'm not going to, drag David through. But in short, at the time when I first started doing Thai, I really had no idea about comprehensible input, not even, like, much less ALG at the time. And so what I had done before with Chinese is I had done, as part of what I did with Chinese, was Pimsleur. And so I started with Pimsleur, and then I didn't have a whole lot of time or willingness to like actually study and like start with the script and all that. So I didn't do that. But what I did was I did the 30 lesson Pimsleur course over and over and whatever. And then after a few months of that, plus trying TiPod 101 and some of the other ones, I was kind of like not going anywhere. And then I heard about comprehensible input and ALG. And at the time, my understanding of the method obviously was not fully formed, but what it seemed like to me was something similar to, say, mass immersion. And I didn't even really understand the silent period. So I, and then it evolved. And eventually, by the time I had got, was in connection with the AUA teachers that came out and started doing their own thing, including ALG Thai and the others. And several of them you can see on Comprehensible Thai. I was already at kind of like an intermediate level in listening. And so what I was doing was mass immersion coupled with hour-long lessons that were basically like picture description with a native speaker. So they'd have these pictures. Some of the pictures are on Comprehensible Thai. They were actually drawn for this purpose by a student at AUA. And so I had teachers like Crew Artie and so on kind of just talk about the pictures. And then that was where I was kind of getting most of my comprehensible input, where I actually understood what was going on. And then I took that to the native content, which I listened to the rest of the day passively, which meant basically 70 to 90% focus, depending on what I was doing. Whereas when I did the picture description, it was 100% focus, right? So I would say, how many hours do I have? A crazy amount. I never documented it, but because it was mass immersion, there was a lot of passive listening. I sunk thousands of hours into this. But it was, in terms of months, where I started comprehensible input to where I was like feeling like, okay, I just want native content. The assisted immersion, the ALG content is too boring now. If I remember correctly, it was I'd say 9 to 11 months or so. And so then I focused on that, and I did another year where it was like mostly listening to that stuff for a lot. So tons of hours. I am able to understand, if I had to throw a percentage on it, I would say 90 to 95, or even sometimes 99% or 100%. If we're talking about Dhamma, if we're talking about Buddhism, which is why I actually learned Thai in the first place, a lot of different Dhamma talks, like 30 minutes an hour, I understand 100% of it, even some of the nuances, like, and like cultural things. Because obviously Thai culture, it comes into Thai Buddhism somewhat. It's not all 100% pure Buddhism, right? And so pure Buddhism, this could be another crazy discussion, but I just mean, stuff from the Pali Canon, yeah, that's my main domain of native content is Dhamma. And then recently I've been watching some Thai series, and I'm understanding them way more than enough to enjoy it. I mean, we're talking 90-95% understanding, if not for certain scenes and periods, 100%. And that is my, give me a second, David.
Okay. So as John was saying, that foundation to be able to turn on like a Thai series on TV or something is a good benchmark. For me, if you wanted to talk Buddhism, I'd understand some, not all, after living there for 35 years still. But yeah. I'm not completely ignorant of it all. Right. If you want to talk about cars and auto repair, I probably understand everything. So.
Yeah, whereas I would understand nothing, even in English.
Right. And one comment about this as a method is because you can be exposed to so much breadth of language. It's like you find yourself in a situation where you don't know what they're talking about, you still follow it. And that's been my experience, whereas my friend who studied in a structural way and lived in Thailand and forever can get in certain situations and know nothing what's going on. And I've never experienced that, since there's so many aspects of communication that you pick up in this methodology that you're not even aware of.
Right.
That you get into almost any situation and you follow what's happening.
Yeah. Definitely. And if you don't have that experience, then when you're lost, you're lost. It's right. Zero right. Now.
Yes.
So, but since this is a video about outputting, and the question was asked, where I'm at and stuff, I'll say a little bit about that, because the channel has evolved. Like at first, it started out with I'm just sharing these comprehensible input lessons that I was getting, and occasionally giving some indication of my progress speaking, right? And as my understanding of the method developed, I realized, oh wow, I'm doing it wrong, so I stopped and I went back to a silent period. But like David has said, when you get some of those things wired, some of them are just wired, there is some, I believe there may be some development or whatever, but they're it's a thing. The ceiling's a thing. And I spent hours and hours parroting on Pimsleur, and that definitely showed. It turned off my some of the reception of tones and sounds, because I had already defined them for myself. So when the input came in, I heard what I thought I heard, not what I actually heard, and so
there's whole studies about that, that actual aspect of how the brain works in terms of visual as well as audio. And, this idea that what we see when we're looking at something isn't what's really there. It's what we're perceiving here. And it may not be the same as what's actually out there. And so we see that very true in language and how it develops.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. And that's actually sometimes an argument why people say, well, you should be learning the script first, right? Because then you have the sounds defined for you and whatever, and you defined correctly instead of,
However, sounds aren't defined by scripts. Scripts are a result of a sound. The sounds come first.
Right.
And so if you're defining them from a script, you're still using sounds you have, not sounds you don't know or can't hear.
Okay. So one last thing, I just want to wrap up on myself here. And so as I started to come back from my retrospective silent period, I realized, okay, like ceiling is there, and also, so I kind of disappeared from the channel as far as, something on the channel. And that's the reason, because even if I were to work on my Thai and whatever, the channel has it's evolved into, it didn't start this way, but it evolved into a platform for teaching Thai via ALG, as well as just kind of spreading the ALG process. And if I was to stay on the channel as an example, that would be ridiculous, because what I did was not ALG, and the results, although it proves.
So can I disagree with you?
Okay.
On this point, I'm not going to go so far as to say what you've done or not done is a mistake.
Okay.
But you represent more people than I do in terms of people who are learning Thai and want to.
Right.
And I have always felt like whether or not you can go back and undo what's been done, which I don't think is possible. And maybe one day we can undo some of the effects, and some days, and maybe not all. But all of that aside, you're still representative of more people.
Right.
And the value that this as a methodology offers to almost everyone is huge.
Right.
No matter what else you want to add or don't add, for whatever reason, the input that you need is hard to get, period.
Yeah, for sure.
And what we offer is that input.
Yes.
So using yourself as an example in any event has benefit.
Okay. I just, I could be an example of someone who started out
exactly,
whatever. But as I'm the only example on the channel, I think a lot of people coming to the channel would be like, "Oh, this is what happens when you do ALG."
Just don't hold yourself up as the example. No, well, you don't have to make that.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. But just me being on the channel speaking Thai.
Right. So we can find ways to make all that explicit if you want.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think it makes for a good argument that no matter where you are, what you've done, input has a huge benefit for everyone.
Definitely. All right. So that was this question. And all right. So is your purpose to sound like a native or to be able to speak without okay, so this is back to that question. Are you trying to and ALG is the latter, and
I think both.
Okay.
It's not different. So you get the sounds in the same way you get the meanings.
Okay.
It's the same process on the personal end. Put it another way, you can't have sounds without meanings or meanings without sounds.
Right.
They go together. It's like saying, well, is your purpose to learn grammar or to have a good vocabulary? Well, I don't know how you separate it if you're talking about using language.
Okay.
It's all part of the same thing.
In the context of ALG, right, they come together organically.
They do, but in the context of language, they're not of much use separated either. What good is grammar if I don't know what the words mean?
Correct. Yeah. A lot of people who are doing the take charge of the system, structural approach, effort approach, though, like with the shadowing, right? The focus is anyway, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So both. All right. Both. Let's see here. I have Problems using the method. Okay, so this is an interesting one about the method online. You know, I have problems using this method online. I did try, but I noticed I get distracted very easily. When I was in Thailand last time, I did appreciate the power of immersion. Any tips for this issue, please?
So what are the things that distracted you, I guess, is where I would go. I remember when I was in the classroom, we had things that were, and this also came up in our conversation earlier on about interference. We had unconditioned, the rooms were not air conditioned. And one of the classrooms had a dog or two or three that would bark incessantly below us. And we were on the third floor, and the dogs were down on the ground floor barking up a storm all the time. And that was interference. So getting air conditioning, closing the windows made a big improvement on those live classes. If I'm at home getting distracted, like I was earlier by the bird, for example, yeah, well, you can always kill the bird. Not a very Buddhist solution, but
there's always more birds. You're not going to kill them all. They tried that in China and it didn't work.
Let him go.
Yeah, Mao didn't, it didn't work well. All right.
Yeah, the Buddhist way would be let him loose. But you know, there's ways. So I guess for me, it comes to mind is what's distracting you now. Having said all that, because that's easy and obvious, the thing that I found difficult, whether live or online, was keeping my mind focused on what they're talking about. Anytime that the conversation was a bit out of reach, I would lazily sometimes just go somewhere else in my head. Start thinking about, you know, the last time I was out with my friends or the next time I'm going to be or something, you know, whatever.
Right.
So that's a different aspect of being distracted.
Right.
I personally found that doodling on a piece of paper helped me stay in the conversation.
Interesting. A little like an ADHD.
And that's just personal.
Yeah, a little bit of extra.
But it is an aspect, you know, you sit, and this comes back to what we talked about earlier about taking breaks.
Yeah.
You know, it was, now online, we don't offer enough hours for it to be too much of a challenge. And if you're doing a lot of video, that's even more challenging to stay focused, I think.
Yeah. So I think that if I could, I believe that if you're getting distracted, it falls into kind of two categories, right? Maybe three. Okay. Assuming there's no outside distractions like dogs barking, it's just you and the content. It's either the content is not compelling enough for you or it's not comprehensible enough for you, right?
Generally, yes.
Okay. One way to improve the compellingness and even the comprehensibility, because you're getting real-time feedback, is to take the online, the live classes, right? Because with the live classes, typically the class size is not too big. The teachers can see you. They can see how you're reacting to the content. Is it comprehensible? Is it compelling? And this is actually where the teachers shine the most because they have the most experience with this. They are new to making these static videos. So at least the Thai ones, right? At least the Thai teachers. Obviously, Pablo's a master of it already. And I'm not sure what his experience with live lessons are, but for the Thai teachers that came from AUA, they're masters at the live lessons. That's their strong point. So.
Yeah. So, and I think there's benefits to both, all of it. You know, nothing's going to be perfect, but feedback is really important. So feedback about what's interesting and what you find not interesting. You know, I would be kind of, if I was a student interested in this as a methodology and helping us develop it, you know, anytime you find something like really boring, I could follow what you were talking about and I found it really boring or something like that.
Yeah.
It can be helpful.
Okay. Sure. I think we covered it. This is an interesting one. I don't think this is very much, how would we say, this is not really specific to the output topic that we're on here now. But this is a new person who wasn't able to ask the question in our input videos back in the day, a year or two ago, right? And it's a common question. It's a common thing that people say. As a visual learner, I feel words in context. Basically, I feel I'm a visual learner. That means reading is the way for me to learn a language. And before I allow or turn it over to David to break this down from his perspective, for me, ALG is the most visual method there is. Look, you got a white paper with black letters on it, or you're seeing somebody do something. A human being is moving their hands. They're doing this. They're drawing. What could be more visual than that, right? So it's and plus, I know David, you're going to talk about this. You didn't learn your native language through reading, right? Okay, now so I'm done.
So I guess if you're trying to memorize, can't disagree with any of it. Our goal is not memorizing. So we're not teaching people how to memorize anything. I would also say that memorization had very little to do, maybe nothing to do with my ability in using either of my languages, English or Thai. So I don't have that in my, if I had a certain goal in learning Thai or English, I don't think memorization would come into play for me. If we're memorizing, I think written words are good. One of the ways. It's just not what we're doing here.
Right. So by memorize, you're David are referring specifically to conscious memorization. You are memorizing things in ALG. It's just it happens unconsciously. It's coming in. It's
I'm not. I think
remembering.
No, I think that memorizing is something quite different from acquiring.
Yeah. Right. I'm
in
saying
any sense.
in
any sense.
The words are there. They come back. So they are remembered in some way.
That's the difference.
Right? They're not forgotten.
And they don't require active anything on my part other than being part of the conversation, being there.
Right.
Which is distinctly different from memorization in terms of the active part of it.
Right. So when we usually talk about memorization, we're talking about active, conscious memorization, like you're trying. But just because we said we're not doing memorization, don't think that you're not getting the words. You are. The words will be there later, and be there in a better way, in a more useful way, and in a way that does not easily go away. Like they're there.
See, and so here's, if we think about two different worlds out there, you've got one world of things you consciously put in your head, and you've got this other world of all your experiences. Native, normal, like the way we use our language, native language, it all comes from the stuff that happened in our life, not from what we memorize. Now, you can memorize stuff and pull it back and bring it in, but it's a different world of knowledge, if you will, than what you use as you're just communicating with friends or using a language. And that, I think, is demonstrated when we fail to see the crossover. That's why you have the Filipino who can sing a Thai song like they're perfect native Thai, and then they come away and they don't speak any Thai. Or the Thai who can do the same thing in English. Oh, they nailed that English song. I'm going to speak to them, and they don't know how to talk in English. It's a different world.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So this is someone who has actually created a really cool course, 10-hour course on what do they call it? Constructed language. It's not a real language, but it's super simple language called Toki Pona. And it's an awesome little thing. I don't know if you've seen it yet, David, but it's sweet. And he's got a lot of interesting theories and ideas, most of which are over my head. But we're going to throw this one at you, David, and we'll see what happens. Do you hypothesize that the affective dimension is important for listening competence to convert to output? Something like a child's desire to be like the grown-ups.
So, yes. I think because without it, you can't really invest the time it takes, no matter how you learn.
Mm.
I don't think, there's got to be some motivating factor with the child. It's like, this is the world I'm in. I'm going to be a part of it, because
Well, what about the Swedes? What about the Swedes you were talking about? They were just kind of there.
Their option was to go back to Sweden and be not supported, perhaps, or something. So there was a huge incentive.
Okay.
I'm not clear on what exactly, but I know that they'd lose their funding.
Okay.
They were riding free, buddy. Right. That's a huge incentive.
Well,
that might be an incentive for me, right? I mean, if someone came to me and said, "How would you like to live for free in Spain at our, and all you've got to do is take this course and pass it," well, I'd be there every day. You mean you pay for food expenses and accommodation and everything? Yeah, it's cheaper than keeping you alive here.
Definitely in my early 20s, I would.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And so exactly.
Okay.
But there's got to be an incentive.
So again, this is like so many people want to know, and we touched on it again, but we touched on it before. But how do you fix interference years later? Fossilized error. Okay. All right. So again, as from what the experience has been, the answer is most we don't know how to fix. They're not really fixable.
Don't know how to
do it. Yeah. All right.
And if you've got like John and we talked about this, right? But if whatever you've done, you've done. Accept that and move on. Don't get stuck on that. The likelihood that what's missing still is input is very, very high. No matter where you are in your language work, input is what's hardest to get. Native input, right?
Right. Yes. Both that's compelling and incomprehensible, right? And to have that for so many hours.
Yes, that's the hard one.
Okay. So this is the person who just we'll do this one first, because this is from the person, I believe it's from the person who just asked this. So we're going to go back to that. How are Thais about speaking? Oh, okay. Yeah, we can do this one. I think, David, you touched on it. Like, they're the French of Asia. Like, they, if you don't have perfect Thai, they're going to be throwing the English at you. So
that's a great 2 questions. And the first question is, Thais are very good about speaking English to you these days in Bangkok. You get out of Bangkok, you still are confronted with people who will avoid you if they can, for the most part. I think that in Bangkok Thais, even clearly my Thai is better than their English. It's more and more common for them to just use English.
Yeah. They want to practice too, right? They're
absolutely. Yeah. This is what gives hope to the idea of a network, right? We can find Thais whose English isn't that good and plug them in. We've got something going.
I think you can probably, not just Bangkok, but you can divide the country into places and people where they're interacting with foreigners, and that's like part of their livelihood.
Yeah. Pattaya and Chiang Mai are 2 exception places where, I don't, they're almost not a part of Thailand, to be honest.
Lots of foreigners.
They're exceptions because of the number of foreigners that live there.
Okay.
More percentage-wise than Bangkok.
Right. Okay, so this is an interesting one. I believe this may be our last one. This is from Tim. Tim is, I believe, at the 300 or 400 hours of input or so level, and so he's been asking a lot of questions about outputting and like the silent period and like, is this really a thing? Children acquire language through comprehensible input, output, or plus output, or try before full control of speech muscles. right? Because they're sitting there making sounds and the wrong sounds, and they're trying.
Keep the question up. Don't bring that down, if you would. Let's keep that up here.
Okay.
Right? So you're asking about 2 or 3 things here. We don't consciously control output muscles or anything. We don't think about them. So an interesting, what is the, it's been years since I read it. The guy, there was I'm thinking control theory, perception controlling what, and so on. There's an engineer who came up in electrical engineering, who developed this whole thing about control theory. And you can look it up online. It's still around, but it changed, I think, our understanding of what controls what. Perception, control theory. Google those 2 words, you get his name. It will come to mind. Very interesting kind of stuff. But it's backwards from how we think about it and how we talk about it. Basically dealing with what controls what. And he shows how our perception controls what we do, not the other way around. Or how what we do controls our perception. Anyway, I'm boggled because it's been years since I read that. And Powers is his name, William Powers.
Okay.
Bill Powers, right? Mispronunciation is eventually corrected as what we say compares itself to what's in our head as the correct thing we're trying to produce. So whatever's in our mind about what we're trying to say, that's what our muscles and everything come to this point and achieve. So this thing in our head, if it came here from native speakers speaking Thai, and that's what I'm speaking from, my speech will get to that quite quickly. And not just word by word, but as I use the language. Now, suppressing output, wrong? Yes, in a short sentence, except that because we're not children, right? We have the ability to do something that actually can interfere. And that ability gets in the way of the natural process. So initially we suppress output. Why? So that we don't use it. Now, I've known people who suppress the output, but inside they're still talking. That's the same as talking. It doesn't matter if it's coming out of your mouth or not. If you're doing all that work in your head, it's going to create the same problems as if you're talking out your mouth. So it isn't about speaking per se. It's about the mental process of trying to take this that I'm hearing and repeat it in, get the meaning, get the words, get the sounds, get everything in place and be able to reproduce it. That process is something kids can't do. Right. Mentally. They just don't have that capacity.
Right. So actually, I think Tim's understanding really fits what you've said. It's just maybe there's a misunderstanding about the silent period. So yes, this whole process of input and then output, if it's done naturally and automatically, the mispronunciation is eventually corrected, right? There's this, sure. Right. Okay.
It happens as you speak.
Right. What's being suppressed or what's being abandoned or avoided is conscious effort to put things together to force output, not the output itself, but the process of consciously putting it together.
It's a good distinction. Yes.
Okay. Sweet. All right. I believe we have come to the end of this marathon, my friend. Thank you so much, David. Is there anything else you'd like to add or throw in before we?
Yeah, it's just every time we do one of these, I say, let's keep it to an hour or less. And we've not come close twice. But yeah, we'd love, as you guys have questions, right, Jonathan, right, myself, we don't forget the questions, and we can bring them into a format like this if it's helpful. Happy to do so. So
Yeah.
other than that, I know for myself, and I speak for John, I think we both appreciate your interest and partnership in this whole, I mean, it really is a labor of love. In ALG, we charge a bit so I can pay the teachers because they're doing a work that is hard and requires a bit of something on their part. And it just seems fair and sustainable that way. But it has never been a venture to try to get rich or become world renowned or anything like that. So the more interest you have, the other thing is, I know that at least one of you, and based on past experience, more than one, are interested in looking at ways to develop ALG in your own realm, whatever that is, whatever language and so on. Anything I can do to help you with that, I'm interested in being a supporting ally. So that's all I can think of.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, as some of the viewers have said, thank you so much, David. Truly very generous, and we appreciate it. And hopefully at some point in the future, we will do it again. Geez. During the silent period, are you allowed to speak in your mind? We just touched on this, right? Like, not if you're forcing it, not if you're putting it together, right?
Yeah. It has nothing to do with whether the words come out of your mouth. It's the mental process that has to be actually altered. And that's the adult, kind of the adult pitfall, if you will, is normally we're trained to do that. All of school almost trains you to process what you take in that way. And you want to turn that off. As counterintuitive as that is, you'll get better results letting your brain do what it did at least once.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. And maybe in a few months, I'll try to.
Well, let's do it again. Get your schedule in order.
Yeah. I'll try to beg my wife to let me do it.
That's right.
Beg my mom to watch my kid. So thank you again, David. And
thank you. All right.